The first time the soldier saw me, his hand went for his sidearm like the motion had been carved into his bones. The second time, he forgot his training. His eyes widened, his breath hitched, and the corridor, full of armored boots and humming security drones, went quiet in a way that felt impossible on a warship. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him the way you look at someone you've already met in the worst place in the universe. "Do you remember me, soldier?" I asked. The young Marine's visor was up, face pale beneath the ship's cold lights. The name tag on his chest read VANCE in blocky Commonwealth lettering. He stared at the med patch on my wrist, the old, cracked one with dried adhesive stains and a faded serial number. Then his gaze flicked to my throat, to the scar. A thin, pale line that curved like a crescent moon, right where the Queen's blood had once spilled over my fingers. His mouth worked soundlessly before he found his voice. "No," he said, because denial was safer than memory. I don't." Behind him, the ship's intercom chimed a soft, polite note. A voice like warm metal and distant thunder drifted into the corridor. "Escort him to the observation deck," the voice commanded. "And be gentle, he has earned that much." Every soldier in the corridor snapped to attention, not for the Marine, for the voice. The alien Queen's voice. Vance's eyes flicked upward like he expected the ceiling to open and swallow him. That's her." I let out a slow breath and felt the old ache in my ribs answer back. "Yes," I said, "that's her." "Then who the hell are you?" I smiled without humor. "Someone she hasn't forgotten." War has a way of shrinking the universe, not in size, in meaning. When you're out past the shipping lanes, beyond the polite trade routes and the hollow tourist stars, you stop thinking in terms of politics and history. You stop thinking in terms of species and diplomacy. You think in terms of air, water, heat. You think in terms of alive and dead and the thin line between them. I learned that line on a moon with no name. We called it K-19 because Command ran out of patience before it ran out of planets. It was a dark rock in the shadow of a gas giant, carved with old canyons and frozen lakes that shimmered like broken glass. There was no civilian population to save, no infrastructure to defend. Just a listening post that had stopped answering calls. And a treaty that was hanging by a thread. The alien empire, our uneasy ally, had sent a diplomatic delegation to investigate. We'd sent a Marine platoon as support, which is military talk for insurance. On paper, it was a simple mission: secure the outpost, find survivors, determine what went wrong. In reality, it was a tinderbox, because their delegation included the Queen, not just a monarch, not just a symbol. A living cornerstone of the treaty that had kept two empires from tearing each other apart. The Commonwealth had spent decades learning their language, their etiquette, their traditions. We de-learned how to bow without looking weak, how to speak without implying insult, how to hold our weapons without triggering their instincts. And none of it mattered on K-19 because the first thing we found was a crater where the outpost used to be. The second thing we found was movement in the snow. Vance wasn't on that mission. He was younger then, still earning his place. But I remember the faces that were there. I remember my Sergeant Rios chewing gum like it was a prayer. I remember Lieutenant Harrow, pale and furious, trying to talk into a dead, calm line. And I remember the Queen. She didn't look like a queen in the way humans imagine it. No crown, no jewels, just a tall figure wrapped in a cloak that seemed to drink light, flanked by guards with eyes like cut amber. Her skin was a deep, iridescent gray that caught the cold moonlight in ripples like oil on water. Her posture was straight in a way that didn't allow the universe to forget she existed. When the crater came into view, I expected grief. What I saw was calculation. She stepped to the edge, stared down at the melted rock and twisted metal, and her throat sacs fluttered. An involuntary motion, my translator later told me, associated with shock. Then she turned her gaze on Harrow. "This was not accident," she said in crisp Commonwealth standard, her accent precise in a way that made it more unsettling. Harrow swallowed. "We don't know yet, Your Majesty." Her eyes narrowed. "You will." There are moments in war when you feel something bigger than yourself move through the air, like a storm changing direction. That was one of them. A human lieutenant and an alien queen standing over a crater, both trying not to become the spark that burned down the treaty. And then a gunshot echoed across the ice. A sharp crack, not ours. Everyone hit the ground like gravity doubled. Snow exploded off the ridge line 100 meters away. A second shot followed closer. Their guards moved like a single organism, interlocking shields that shimmered with thin blue energy. Our Marines spread out, rifles up, scanning for targets. Harrow started barking orders that came out half swallowed by his helmet mic. The Queen didn't move. She stood there on the crater's edge like an accusation. A third shot. This one struck one of her guards in the shoulder. The alien staggered, shield flickering, and for half a second a gap opened in their formation. That was all a sniper needed. The fourth shot went for her throat. I saw it coming in the same way you see a car accident before it happens, your brain screaming no while your body tries to catch up. Time did that war thing where it thickened into syrup. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the bullet trail looked like a thread of light. I remember Harrow yelling something I couldn't understand. I remember the Queen's eyes widening, not in fear but in surprise, as if the universe had dared to break its own rules. And I remember my own feet moving before my thoughts did. I tackled her. Her body was heavier than it looked, dense with muscle and bone. We went down hard on the ice, the impact slamming breath out of me. I felt pain flare through my shoulder like a hot nail. The bullet missed her throat by centimeters. It hit me, not center mass. Lower, it tore through the meat above my collarbone, close enough to graze the edge of my windpipe. The impact felt like getting hit with a sledgehammer made of fire. The world flashed white, then narrowed into a tunnel full of static. The Queen's cloak tangled around us. Her breath was warm and sharp against my helmet visor. I tasted blood and metal and something else, the faint scent of her skin like ozone after lightning. Her guards moved, their shields snapping back into place. Our Marines returned fire. The ridge line erupted in snow and dirt as rounds stitched across it. Somewhere someone screamed. I tried to speak and only managed a wet gurgle. The Queen's eyes locked on mine, not the distant eyes of a ruler. The eyes of a living creature pinned beneath another's weight, feeling the universe try to end her. Her hand pressed to my throat, fingers long and cold. Not an attack. In assessment, like she could read the damage through touch. She said something in her own language, two sharp syllables that didn't translate. Her guards hesitated, shocked. Then she did something I still don't know how to explain. She pulled her cloak aside, exposed the thin line of skin along her own neck where bioluminescent veins pulsed like starlight, and she pressed her mouth to my wound. The sensation was electric, not pain. Not pleasure, something alien and intimate and terrifying. My translator later tried to describe it as bioelectrical sealing, a medical technique their species used in emergencies. To me, it felt like my blood remembered how to be mine again. Her throat's sacs fluttered as she exhaled. The wound tightened, the bleeding slowed, but she didn't heal me. She kept me alive long enough to move. Her guards hauled us back behind cover. I remember the ice scraping against my armor. I remember Harrow's voice in my ear, frantic, ordering a retreat. I remember the sky above us lighting up as a dropship came in hot, its engines screaming. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the Queen's face hovering close, her eyes reflecting the burning ridge line. And the last thing I heard was her voice, low and steady, speaking to me, not through the translator, but directly. "Human," she whispered. "Do not die." I woke in a field hospital on a carrier, with the smell of disinfectant and stale coffee and the soft hum of life support around me. My throat hurt like someone had stuffed broken glass down it. My voice was a rasp. My shoulder was wrapped in smart bandage that warmed and cooled in pulses. A medic told me I'd lost a lot of blood, that the Queen's intervention had kept me from bleeding out before they could operate. The official report said I'd acted on instinct, that I'd prevented an assassination and preserved diplomatic stability. There were medals, there were handshakes. There was a formal commendation delivered by a Commonwealth admiral who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. There was also a letter, not paper, not even digital in the way humans think. It was a thin strip of woven material that shimmered when you moved it like it was made of frozen song. Came with an interpreter who handled it like a sacred relic. "This is a memory thread," the interpreter explained. "A mark of debt. It is extremely rare." I stared at it from my bunk. "What does it mean?" The interpreter's voice softened. "It means the Queen remembers." I laughed, which turned into coughing, which turned into pain. "Great," I croaked. "Tell her I'd prefer she forgets me. I'd like a quiet life." The interpreter looked almost amused. "That is not how debts work in her culture." "No," I said, "it never is." After that, I went back to being a Marine. Not a hero, not a legend, just another body in armor with a rifle and too many nightmares. The war didn't end on K-19. It crawled on through months of skirmishes and raids and ceasefires that lasted as long as a politician's patience. The Queen survived. The treaty survived. I tried to forget the feeling of her mouth against my wound. I tried to forget the look in her eyes. I tried to forget the words she'd spoken, "Do not die." Because in war, promises like that are a curse. And then 2 years later, I was pulled out of a rotation on the frontier and told to report to a diplomatic warship that didn't belong to my species. The Sovereign Dawn, her ship. That's how I ended up standing in a corridor lined with alien guards, staring at a young Marine named Vance who looked like he'd swallowed his own heart. He wasn't wrong to be afraid. The Sovereign Dawn felt wrong to human senses, too quiet, too smooth, too alive. The walls were grown, not built, with faint veins of light that pulsed under the surface. The air smelled faintly of mineral and rain. The lighting was soft and indirect, as if the ship refused to cast harsh shadows. And the guards, they stood still as statues, but their eyes tracked every micro-movement. Their weapons weren't guns. They were curved devices like bone and glass humming with restrained force. Vance cleared his throat. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice low. "They said you're some kind of envoy." I shrugged. The motion tugged at my healed shoulder. "They said a lot of things. I'm here because I got a summons." "A summons from her?" I nodded. He swallowed. "She doesn't summon humans, not like this." "Apparently," I said, "she does now." He looked at my scar again like it was proof of an impossible story. "Is it true?" he asked, quieter. "What they say." I leaned closer, just enough to make him stiffen. "Depends what they say." "That you," he hesitated. "That you saved her, that she was dying." I held his gaze. "Yes." Vance's eyes flicked to the guards, then back to me. "Why would she remember one Marine out of billions?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't flattering, because the truth wasn't about heroism. The truth was about a look in an alien queen's eyes when she realized a human had chosen her life over his own without hesitation. It was about the way debts wound through her culture like bloodlines. It was about the fact that she'd never had anyone do that for her. "She remembers," I said finally, "because she's not as different as you think." Before Vance could reply, the corridor's far door dilated open like an eye. Warm air rolled out, carrying a faint scent like crushed leaves and metal. A voice spoke again, closer now not from an intercom, but from within. "Bring him." Vance's spine straightened. He stepped aside like gravity had shifted. I walked through the door. The observation deck wasn't what I expected. No throne, no grand hall, no ceremonial guards in dramatic poses. It was a quiet room filled with windows. Stars spilled across the glass like scattered ash. The gas giant K-19 had orbited hung in the distance, its bands of color slow and hypnotic. The moon itself was a dark bead against the giant's glow. The Queen stood with her back to me, hands clasped behind her. Her cloak flowed down her body like liquid shadow, but her posture was not rigid, almost tired. When she turned, I saw the differences. She was older, not in the way humans age, wrinkles and sagging skin, but in the way her bioluminescent veins glowed slightly dimmer, the way her eyes held more shadows. The scar along her neck, thin and pale, caught the starlight when she moved. Her gaze landed on my throat. Then she lifted her hand and pressed 2 fingers to her own scar in a gesture that felt like a salute. "You live," she said. "Seems I do," I replied. Her throat sacs fluttered, an alien motion that, according to translators, could mean many things. On her it looked like restrained emotion. "I ordered you not to die," she said. "Yeah," I rasped. "I got the memo." For the first time, her mouth, strange, elegant, not quite human, curved slightly at the corners, a smile. It wasn't warm. "Not exactly. It was something sharper, recognition. You speak with less fear than the others," she observed. "I'm not here to impress you," I said. "You summoned me, I'm here to find out why." She studied me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of it like gravity again, not predatory, not cruel, just intense, like she was mapping me against memory. "You do not know what you did," she said softly. "I tackled you in front of a sniper," I replied. "I got shot, you sealed the wound." Both lived pretty straightforward. Her eyes narrowed. "No," she stepped closer. The air seemed to change around her like the ship itself paid attention. "You broke a line that has never been broken," I frowned. "What line?" "In my empire," she said, voice lower, "a queen is not touched without ritual, not held, not thrown to the ground like—" She paused, searching for a word that didn't exist in her language. "Like a comrade, like an equal," I snorted. "Trust me, it wasn't a romantic gesture." Her gaze flicked up, sharp. "Do you think I summon you for romance?" I held up a hand. "No, I think you summon me because you need something." Silence. Then she turned away, looking out at the stars. "My advisors say you are dangerous," she said. "Not because you are violent, because you are unafraid to act." "I'm a Marine," I said. "That's the job." "No," she said, and there was steel in it. "A Marine obeys orders. You did not have an order to save me." I didn't answer because she was right. I'd acted on instinct, on something dumb and human. Someone is about to die and I can stop it. She faced me again. "There is a faction," she continued, "that believes the treaty has made my empire weak. They believe humans are a sickness in our alliance. They tried to kill me on K-19 to fracture peace." My stomach tightened. "And they're still around." "Yes," I watched her carefully. "So you want me to help you hunt them?" She shook her head. "If I hunt them openly, I create martyrs. If I do nothing, they grow?" I frowned. "So what do you want from me?" She stepped closer again until I could see the fine texture of her skin, the faint glow beneath it like a night ocean. Her voice dropped to something almost private. "I want you to stand beside me." I blinked. I cut myself off. "That's politics." "It is survival," she corrected. "They fear you not because you are powerful alone, but because you remind them of what humans represent." "And what's that?" Her eyes held mine, steady and unblinking. "That a life can be valued without permission." I felt something twist in my chest that had nothing to do with old wounds. "You summoned a human Marine," I said slowly, "to make a statement." "A truth," she said. I exhaled through my nose. "You could have picked an ambassador, a decorated general, someone who knows the language." "I did not summon a symbol," she said. "I summoned the one who acted." Her gaze flicked again to my scar. "I summoned the one who held my blood and did not flinch." There it was, the thing I'd tried to forget. I swallowed, throat tightening around old pain. "You know what happens if I say yes," I said. "Humans will use it, your people will use it, they'll twist it into propaganda." "They already do," she said. "They speak your name in my court, they speak it as warning." I let out a bitter laugh. "My name's just—" "Your name," she interrupted, and her voice carried a note that made the ship's air feel heavier, "is a thread." The memory thread, the shimmering strip in my duffel bag, tucked away like a curse. I stared at her. "You still have that?" She lifted her hand. Between her fingers was a matching thread, woven light that pulsed faintly. "I have kept it," she said, "because I have not repaid the debt." My mouth went dry. "I didn't save you for a reward." "I know," she said. "That is why the debt is so deep." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Out beyond the windows, the stars didn't care about empires or treaties. They burned and spun and waited for all our politics to turn into dust. Finally, I said, "What does standing beside you look like?" Her throat sacs fluttered again, this time with something that felt like relief. You will walk into my council chambers, she said, unarmed, unbowed, as you walked into death with me. I frowned. And if someone tries to kill you again, her eyes sharpened, then my empire will see what humans do when they choose. And what's that? She stepped closer until her voice was barely above a whisper. They endure, she said. They bleed, they refuse to fall. A shiver ran down my spine, not fear, recognition, because she wasn't wrong. Humans were stubborn that way. We de-built civilizations on rocks that tried to kill us. We decrossed oceans because we hated the idea of an edge. We defought wars we should have lost because surrender tasted worse than death. And sometimes we'd thrown ourselves in front of bullets for people we didn't even like. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Fine." Her eyes widened slightly. "Fine. I'll stand beside you," I said, "but not as a pet symbol, not as a trophy human." Her gaze narrowed, curious. "Then as what?" "As a reminder," I said, "to your rebels and my politicians both. That we're not allies because paper says so. We're allies because we bled on the same ice." Something in her expression shifted, not softness, something like respect. "Agreed," she said. And then, because the universe has a cruel sense of timing, the lights on the observation deck flickered. A low alarm thrummed through the ship, felt more than heard. The Queen turned sharply, eyes flashing. One of her guards stepped in, speaking rapidly in their language. The translator embedded in my ear buzzed, struggling to keep up. "Intrusion," it finally rendered. "Internal breach, council deck." The Queen's gaze snapped back to me. Her voice was calm, but the air around her felt like a blade. "It begins," she said. They moved fast. Alien guards flowed into motion, cloaks and armor shifting like dark water. The Queen strode ahead, not running. Running implied panic. Her pace was a controlled storm. I followed, unarmed like she demanded. It felt wrong. My hands kept wanting to curl like they were searching for a rifle that wasn't there. Vance appeared at the corridor junction, eyes wide behind his visor. "What's happening?" "Stay behind me," I told him. He blinked. "Sir, not a request," I snapped, and my voice carried the kind of authority that didn't come from rank. It came from having been on the edge and refusing to fall. Vance swallowed and fell in. We reached the council deck doors, massive, grown structures with patterns like veins across them. One door hung half open, torn inward as if something had forced its way through. Inside, the council chamber was chaos. Alien advisors, tall, robed, glowing faintly, clustered in terrified knots. Guards lay on the floor, armor cracked, blue blood shimmering in pools. The air smelled sharp and metallic. And at the far end of the room, someone stood on the raised dais where the Queen's seat would be. A figure in alien armor, but wrong. The armor was pieced together, rough, with symbols scratched into it like scars. In its hand was a weapon that looked like a spear made of light, humming with unstable energy. The figure's helmet was open. Its face was alien but twisted with rage. "Your Majesty," it hissed, voice spitting the words in Commonwealth standard like an insult. "You bring a human into our sacred chamber." The Queen didn't flinch. She stepped forward, cloak sweeping like night. "You have killed my guards," she said calmly. "You have broken law," the rebel laughed. "Law?" It spat blue saliva. "You call it law to kneel beside predators?" Vance stiffened behind me, breath sharp. His hand hovered near his holster. I reached back without looking and pressed 2 fingers against his armor plate. "Don't." The rebel's eyes flicked to me, then narrowed. "And there he is," it murmured. "The one who touched you, the one who dragged you like meat across ice." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my face blank. The Queen's voice cut through the chamber like a knife. "He saved my life," the rebel sneered. "He stole it. He stole your death. You were meant to die on K-19, and your empire was meant to wake from the dream of peace." It lifted the spear. The energy crackled, unstable, hungry. "I will finish what I began." Everything in me went cold, not fear, focus. I had no weapon, no armor, just a scar and a stubborn human body that refused to accept inevitability. The rebel thrust the spear. A streak of light shot toward the Queen's throat. I moved. Not because I wanted to die, because my body remembered a line of light in the snow and refused to watch it happen again. I slammed into the queen, shoulder to her ribs, driving her sideways. The beam grazed her cloak and scorched the air where her neck had been. Pain exploded through my ribs as we hit the floor. The rebel snarled and charged forward, spear rising again. Vance shouted something and finally drew his sidearm, firing. The rounds hit the rebel's armor and sparked, barely slowing it. Alien guards surged, but the rebel swung the spear in a wide arc. The energy sliced through two shields like paper. One guard went down, screaming. I rolled, breath ragged, ribs screaming. The queen pushed up beside me, eyes blazing with fury. For a heartbeat, our gazes met, and I realized something. On K-19, she'd told me not to die. Now I could tell her the same, but I didn't have time for words. I lunged forward, not at the rebel, but at the dais. There, half hidden under the Queen's ceremonial platform, was a control panel, alien tech grown from living crystal and logic, not designed for human hands, but war teaches you fast, ugly lessons. I slammed my palm onto the panel. Nothing, the rebel laughed, spear humming. Human hands cannot command our ship. No, I rasped, blood in my mouth from bitten lip. But they can break it. I grabbed the panel edge and ripped. The living material resisted like tendon, then tore with a wet crack. Sparks burst, blue and white like lightning trapped in glass. The chamber lights flickered. The rebel's spear stuttered. Its energy sputtered like a flame starved of oxygen. The rebel looked down, confused. I tore again, deeper, ripping out a handful of glowing filaments. The chamber went dark for half a second. When the light snapped back, the rebel's spear was dead, just a dull, heavy staff. The rebel stared at it in disbelief. Then the alien guards hit it like a tidal wave. They slammed it to the floor, pinning it, weapons at its throat. Its helmet clattered away. Blue blood smeared across the polished council stone. Silence descended again, thick, stunned. My ribs burned, my hands shook, fingers tingling from contact with alien circuitry. I panted, then looked up. The queen stood, cloak torn, eyes bright as stars. She stared at the destroyed panel, then at me. Not anger, not fear, something that looked dangerously close to awe. You, she said softly. I coughed and winced. Apparently, I rasped, humans can command your ship. A sound rippled through the chamber, not laughter exactly. The queen's throat sacs fluttered, and then she stepped forward, placing herself between me and the council like a shield. She lifted her chin and spoke, voice carrying to every corner. Witness, she said, what humans do. Her gaze swept across her advisors, her guards, the trembling rebel pinned to the floor. They do not ask permission to save a life, she declared. They do not wait for ritual to choose. She looked down at me then, and her voice lowered, just enough that it felt like it was meant for me alone. And they do not forget. Something in my chest tightened again, painful and strange. Vance stepped closer, eyes wide. Sir, he whispered, you just ripped out alien tech with your bare hands. I glanced at him, breath ragged. Yeah, I said, don't try it at home. The rebel thrashed, snarling. This proves nothing. Humans are beasts. They will consume you. The queen turned her gaze on the rebel, and the chamber went cold with it. No, she said, voice like ice on metal. It proves everything. She stepped closer to the rebel, bending slightly so her face was level with its twisted rage. You wanted my death to wake my empire, she said quietly. Instead, you have awakened it to a different truth. The rebel hissed. What truth? The queen's eyes flicked to my scar, then back to the rebel. That strength, she said, is not purity. She straightened, voice rising. Strength is choice. Her hand lifted, and every guard in the chamber tightened their hold on the rebel like a vice. This one will be tried, she declared. Not as martyr, not as hero, as criminal. The rebel screamed, but its words were swallowed by the guards dragging it away. When it was gone, the chamber remained still, like everyone was afraid to breathe. Then one of the older advisors stepped forward, robe shimmering faintly. It bowed not to the queen, to me. I stiffened, uncomfortable. Don't, I muttered. The advisor's voice was soft, translator smoothing it into something almost human. We have feared humans because you do not fit our rules, it said, but perhaps rules are not the same as honor. I didn't know what to do with that, so I did the only thing I knew. I nodded once. Honor's simple, I rasped. You don't leave people behind. The advisor's throat sacs fluttered. And then slowly, like a tide turning, the rest of the chamber bowed too. Not deep, not worship, acknowledgement. Vance stared like his brain had broken. The queen didn't bow. She just watched me with those bright eyes full of storm and memory. When the chamber finally emptied, when the guards cleared the bodies and the advisors retreated to whispered meetings, the queen stayed behind. So did I. She walked to the window overlooking the stars and stood there a long time without speaking. I leaned against the wall, trying not to show how badly my ribs hurt. My hands still tingled. Finally, she spoke. You broke my ship. I saved your life, I countered. She turned, and for a moment her expression looked almost amused. A costly habit, she said. Yeah, I muttered. Tell me about it. She stepped closer, stopping at the edge of my personal space, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, the faint electrical scent of her skin. You have stood beside me, she said. As I asked, I swallowed, my throat scar pulled tight. Looks like I did. Her gaze softened by a fraction. In my culture, she said, voice low, a debt repaid does not end a thread, it strengthens it. I frowned. That sounds like a trap. Her mouth curved again, that sharp, almost smile. It is only a trap if you try to escape. I exhaled, breath shuddering with pain and something else. What happens now? She lifted the memory thread in her hand, the shimmering strip of woven light. And then she did something that made my pulse stumble. She reached out and tied it around my wrist, just above the old med patch. The material settled against my skin like cool silk. It pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. My court will know, she said. My rebels will know, your commonwealth will know. I stared at it. They'll turn me into a symbol. They will try, she said, but you are not easily shaped. That's supposed to be a compliment. It is an observation, she replied, then paused. And gratitude. The word sounded strange in her mouth, as if her language didn't use it often. I looked up at her. Why me? I asked again, quieter this time. Why not some diplomat who can play your games? She held my gaze steadily. Because when you saw death coming, she said, you did not calculate, you did not negotiate, you chose. I swallowed hard. And because, she added, voice dropping, I have lived my entire life surrounded by those who touch me only with permission. Her eyes flicked to my scar, then back. You touched me, she said, like I was real. For a second, the warship around us felt very small. I shifted, wincing, forcing myself to stay upright. Don't make this into poetry, I muttered. Her throat's sacs fluttered, this time unmistakably amusement. Humans, she murmured, even bleeding you resist meaning. Meaning as heavy, I said. I've carried enough. Her gaze sharpened. And yet you carry it anyway. Outside the window, the stars burned on, indifferent. Inside the quiet observation deck, the queen stepped back, cloak settling like night. She lifted her chin, the ruler again. You will remain aboard my ship, she said, as my honored guest. That's a polite way to say hostage, I muttered. Her eyes gleamed. Hostages do not argue with queens, I shrugged carefully, ribs protesting. Then stop summoning stubborn humans. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said softly, almost like a promise, I summoned the one who refused to let me die. She turned back to the stars. And I will not forget, she added, voice barely above a whisper, that you chose me. I stared at the memory thread on my wrist, feeling its faint pulse against my skin. War shrinks the universe, but sometimes, rarely, it also reveals it. The vastness, the fragile threads between lives, the way one human choice on a nameless moon can ripple into an empire's heart. Behind me, Vance waited at the doorway, still wide-eyed, still trying to fit this moment into the shape of everything he'd been taught. I walked past him, and he stepped aside like I was something sacred or dangerous. Sir, he whispered as I passed, I didn't forget, I paused, looked at him. And because I remembered what it felt like to be young and afraid in a universe full of giants, I put a hand on his shoulder. You'll remember, I said, not because they tell you to. Because you'll see it yourself. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. See what? I glanced back toward the queen, silhouetted against the stars like a living piece of night. The truth, I said. Vance frowned. What truth? I smiled just a little. That humans, I told him, don't bow because we're small. I tapped the scar on my throat, feeling the old ache like a reminder. We bow, I finished, when we choose to. And then I kept walking because war was still out there, rebels were still breathing, and an alien queen had tied a thread around my wrist that felt a lot like a new kind of battlefield. One where the weapon wasn't a rifle. It was a choice, and I'd already made it once. I wasn't about to forget.